Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open.
A lot of people seem convinced that strange experiences must always have an ordinary explanation. Whenever someone describes something supernatural or paranormal, there is usually another person ready to say it was imagination, faulty memory, a dream, stress, or some piece of technology the witness did not understand. I understand why people think that way. There are plenty of stories that can be explained. Houses make noises. Electrical systems fail. Reflections can look like people. Exhaustion can cause someone to hear or see things that are not really there. I am open to those possibilities. But I am 65 years old now, and several things have happened throughout my life that I have never been able to explain that way. I will admit that I am not familiar with every modern electronic device. Technology changes so quickly that there are probably machines and systems today that I would not immediately recognize. Even so, technology cannot explain everything I experienced. Some of these events happened long before modern electronics became common. Others were witnessed by several people at the same time. They were not strange images appearing on a screen or odd noises coming from a speaker. They happened inside my home, in front of people I trusted. I am also not suffering from dementia. Unless I have somehow had it since childhood, that explanation does not work either. My memories are not perfect, of course. No one's are. But the main details of these experiences have stayed clear for decades. One of the strongest happened after my husband and I bought my grandparents' old house. My son was around 5 years old at the time. The house had been in my family for years, and I already had many memories connected to it. To me, it was not simply an unfamiliar building we had purchased. It was the place where my grandparents had lived. My grandfather had cared deeply about that home. It was his pride and joy. He worked hard to maintain it and took great satisfaction in keeping it in good condition. He was the kind of man who noticed when something needed repairing and handled it before the problem became worse. He was also gentle and protective. I never felt unsafe around him. He had a calm presence that made people feel looked after. He was not someone who needed to raise his voice or prove how strong he was. His kindness was enough. One of the things I remember most clearly about him was that he smoked cigars. He smoked them regularly. I did not know anyone else who did. Other people around me may have smoked cigarettes, but cigar smoke had a completely different smell. It was thicker, stronger, and immediately recognizable. Because my grandfather smoked them so often, that smell became closely connected to him in my mind. By the time my husband and I moved into the house, my grandfather had already passed away. A couple who were good friends of ours helped us with the move. Anyone who has moved an entire household knows how exhausting it can be. There are boxes everywhere, furniture to lift, rooms to organize, and dozens of small tasks that seem to appear whenever you think you are nearly finished. Our friends spent the day working alongside us. By evening, all of us were exhausted. After dark, we sat together on the front porch to rest. The work was mostly finished for the day, and we finally had a chance to breathe. I do not remember exactly what we were talking about. It was probably ordinary conversation about the move, the house, or what still needed to be done. The area around the property was quiet. There were no other homes close enough for us to hear people clearly. We were not sitting in a crowded neighborhood where smells and sounds could easily drift from the house next door. None of us was smoking. Then, without warning, the smell of cigar smoke appeared. It was not faint. It was strong enough that everyone noticed it. For a moment, we simply sat there, breathing it in and trying to work out where it was coming from. It smelled as if someone nearby had just lit a cigar. My husband looked around. Our friends did the same. There was no one walking past the house. No vehicle had stopped nearby. There was no stranger standing in the yard or sitting around the side of the porch. The smell was simply there. My husband and our friends became uncomfortable. They knew my grandfather had smoked cigars, and they also knew he had once lived in the house. To them, the sudden smell was frightening. Their reaction made sense. We had just moved into a home belonging to a dead relative, and while sitting outside after dark, all four of us suddenly smelled the one thing most strongly associated with him. But I was not afraid. To me, it felt comforting. I immediately thought of my grandfather. It felt as though he had come to see what was happening at his house. Perhaps he wanted to know who had moved in. Perhaps he was letting me know that he was still connected to the place. I cannot prove that. There may be some ordinary explanation I have never discovered. Maybe cigar smoke traveled from farther away than we realized. Smells can move on the wind, especially at night. It is possible someone was smoking beyond our view, and the air carried it toward the porch. But the smell was extremely strong. There were no nearby houses where someone could have been sitting outside with a cigar. None of us saw anyone in the road or yard. It also appeared suddenly. There had been nothing, and then all at once it surrounded us. If I had been alone, I might have questioned myself later. Maybe I would have decided that returning to my grandparents' house had caused my mind to recreate a familiar smell. Memory can be powerful. Sometimes a place reminds you so strongly of someone that you almost feel they are standing beside you. But I was not the only person who smelled it. My husband smelled it. Both of our friends smelled it. All of us noticed it at the same time. If I imagined the experience, then the three people sitting with me somehow imagined exactly the same thing. That does not seem reasonable. The smell eventually faded, though I do not remember exactly how long it remained. Nothing else happened that night. No one saw a figure on the porch. We did not hear my grandfather's voice, and no doors opened by themselves. There was only the cigar smoke. That was enough. My friends and my husband remained unsettled, but I felt strangely peaceful. My grandfather had loved that home, and I had always known him as a protective person. I did not believe he had come to frighten us. I felt that he was welcoming me back. A few years later, another experience happened in the same house. At the time, I was working overnight shifts. My hours were from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Working that schedule changed my entire daily routine. I was awake while most people were sleeping and trying to rest while the rest of the neighborhood was active. When I returned home after work, I was usually too tired to do much of anything. Instead of going upstairs or preparing properly for bed, I often lay down on the sofa and fell asleep. I needed to wake up around 3 in the afternoon so I could collect my son from school. Sleeping on the sofa made it easier to rest without becoming too comfortable, and sleeping through the time I needed to leave. My husband worked ordinary daytime hours. He usually left for work in the morning and returned sometime after 5 in the evening. Because of that, I was often alone in the house during the day while I slept. One afternoon, at around 2:30, I woke to the sound of heavy footsteps. They came from the kitchen. The steps sounded like a man wearing work boots. They were slow, solid, and heavy enough that I could follow their movement through the house. The footsteps traveled from the kitchen toward the front door. Then I heard the door open. A moment later, it closed. I woke fully and sat up. My first thought was that my husband had come home from work early. That was the most sensible explanation. Maybe he had finished sooner than expected, forgotten something, or come home because he was not feeling well. I got up from the sofa and went to look for him. The house was empty. My husband was not there. The front door was closed. I checked outside, expecting to see his car, but it was not there. At first, I assumed I had dreamed the sounds. I had been sleeping lightly on the sofa after an overnight shift. Perhaps I had heard a noise outside, and my tired mind had turned it into footsteps and a door. I returned to the sofa and eventually forgot about it. Then it happened again. On another afternoon, at almost the same time, I heard the heavy footsteps begin in the kitchen. They moved toward the front entrance. Once again, the door seemed to open and close. Once again, I got up expecting to find my husband. Once again, no one was there. The same thing happened several more times. During the first 4 or 5 incidents, I always checked. Each time, I woke to the sound of work boots crossing the floor. Each time, the footsteps followed the same path. They started in the kitchen, traveled through the house, and ended at the front door. Then I heard the door open and shut. The sounds were clear enough that I never doubted someone had left the house. But whenever I got up, the house was empty. My husband was still at work. There was no unexpected visitor. The first few times I tried to find normal causes. Perhaps a neighbor was opening a car door outside. Maybe the heating system caused the floor to creak in a pattern that sounded like footsteps. The house was old, and old buildings make strange noises. But these did not sound like random creaks. They had weight and rhythm. The sound started in one room and moved steadily toward another. I could hear one step after another. The footsteps did not wander around the house. They followed the same direct route every time, as if someone were leaving for work. The door sound was also convincing. I heard the movement of it opening and closing, not merely a single bang from somewhere in the house. What puzzled me most was the timing. The footsteps usually happened around 2:30 in the afternoon. After the 4th or 5th time, something finally occurred to me. That was around the time my grandfather used to leave the house for work. He had worked at the local steel mill. Like many men who worked in places like that, he wore heavy boots. I could easily imagine the sound of those boots crossing the floor as he prepared to begin his shift. The route also made sense. He would have moved from the kitchen area toward the front entrance before leaving the house. Once I made that connection, my fear disappeared. The next time I heard the footsteps, I did not get up. I stayed on the sofa and listened. The heavy boots crossed the floor. They moved toward the front door. The door opened and shut. Then the house became quiet again. I simply went back to sleep. After that, it became almost ordinary. I cannot say it happened every day, but it happened often enough for me to recognize the pattern. I no longer believed my husband had come home early. I believed I was hearing the routine my grandfather had followed when he was alive. Perhaps it was some kind of memory held by the house. Some people believe buildings can preserve strong events and repeat them under certain conditions, almost like a recording. They call it a residual haunting. According to that idea, the spirit is not necessarily aware of the living people around it. The building simply repeats something that happened many times. My grandfather must have walked that same path to work hundreds or even thousands of times. It had been part of his daily life. Maybe the footsteps were only an echo of that routine. Or perhaps he really was still there in some form, continuing to leave for the steel mill at the same time each day. I do not claim to know which explanation is correct. There may still be an ordinary physical cause. Perhaps changes in temperature cause different parts of the floor to contract around the same time every afternoon. Maybe some combination of nearby traffic, pipes, and the front door created the illusion of someone walking through the house. But that explanation feels forced to me. The sound followed the exact pattern of a person walking. It happened near the time my grandfather would have left for work, and it occurred inside the house he had loved and cared for throughout his life. The cigar smoke and the footsteps were not the only unusual things that happened to me over the years. I could describe several more. Some were small, others were witnessed by people besides me. But these two experiences show why I do not automatically dismiss someone when they say something paranormal happened. I know what it feels like to experience something that does not fit easily into a normal explanation. People often say witnesses are lying, confused, or looking for attention. I was not looking for attention when I smelled cigar smoke on the porch. The event happened during a private evening with my husband and friends. I was not trying to create a story when I heard the footsteps. Most of the time, I was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to sleep before picking up my son. The experiences did not make me famous or important. They simply became memories I carried with me. I am willing to listen to alternative explanations. I genuinely am. I understand that people should examine ordinary causes before deciding that something is supernatural. A strange sound does not automatically mean a ghost. A familiar smell does not prove a dead relative is nearby. But being open-minded should work in both directions. It should mean considering ordinary explanations without refusing to admit that some events remain unexplained. Skepticism becomes unreasonable when it demands that every witness must be mistaken before even hearing what happened. 4 people smelled the cigar smoke. We were sitting together in the same place. None of us was smoking. There were no homes nearby and no visible person who could have created it. Years later, I repeatedly heard heavy work boots cross the house at the same time my grandfather used to leave for his job. The footsteps stopped at the front door, followed by the sound of it opening and closing. When I checked, no one was there. Those are the facts as I remember them. People may interpret them differently. Someone might call the cigar smoke a scent carried by the wind and the footsteps noises from an old house. Perhaps they are correct. But those explanations do not change what the experiences meant to me. The cigar smoke felt like my grandfather, letting me know he was still watching over the home he had loved. The footsteps felt like a familiar routine continuing long after the man who performed it had passed away. Neither experience felt evil. Neither made me believe I was in danger. If anything, they made the house feel protected. That may be why I was able to stop getting up when I heard the boots. Once I connected them to my grandfather, I no longer needed to investigate. I knew the route. I knew the time. And I knew the kind of man he had been. If something of him remained inside that house, I did not believe it meant us any harm. I cannot prove the supernatural exists. I cannot prove my grandfather visited the porch or walked from the kitchen to the front door. But I also cannot honestly claim those events have been explained. I have lived for 65 years. I have had enough time to question my memories and examine different possibilities. My mind has not changed. Some things happen that we do not yet understand. Perhaps science will explain them one day. Perhaps certain sounds, smells, and feelings have physical causes we have not fully recognized. Or perhaps people sometimes leave something behind in the places they loved most. My grandfather loved that house. It was his pride and joy. So when the cigar smoke surrounded us on the porch, I did not feel afraid. And when his heavy boots seemed to cross the floor years later, I eventually stopped getting up to check the door. To me, he was not haunting the house. He was simply still at home. The strongest detail is that both you and your dad saw the man approach the backyard gate. Your dog reacted, and yet the moment your dad opened it, there was nobody there, not even footprints. I'm keeping the summer clothing, the unresponsive dog, the shared sighting, and the police finding nothing at the center. I was waking up one morning and looking out of my bedroom window when I noticed something strange in the backyard. At the same time, my dad was already outside playing with our dog. It was summer, and the weather was warm. The yard looked completely normal. My father was moving around with the dog, and nothing about the morning felt threatening. From my bedroom window, I could see part of our backyard, the fence, and the area behind our neighbor's property. I had only just woken up, so I was probably still tired and not paying close attention to every detail at first. Then I noticed a man walking with a dog. He was moving toward the back of our neighbor's fence. There was nothing unusual about someone walking a dog in the area. People passed through the neighborhood all the time, and animals often caught the attention of our dog. At first, I assumed it was simply a stranger using a path behind the properties. But several details began to bother me. The man was wearing a black hoodie and black trousers. It was the middle of summer. The clothing was heavy and dark for the weather. People can wear whatever they want, of course. Some prefer covering their skin from the sun, and others simply like dark clothes. Still, a black hoodie and full-length black trousers seemed uncomfortable in the heat. It made him stand out. The dog beside him also behaved strangely. Our dog noticed them and started barking. That was normal. Our dog often reacted when other animals or unfamiliar people came close to the property. My dad heard the barking and noticed the man, too. At first, he did not seem concerned. He may have assumed, as I did, that someone was walking past the neighbor's fence and would continue on their way. But the other dog did not react. It did not bark back. It did not pull on its lead, turn its head, or show any interest in our dog. Even calm dogs usually notice another animal barking nearby. They may become alert, slow down, move away, or look toward the sound. This one seemed completely unaffected. It continued beside the man as though our dog was not there. That detail made the scene feel slightly wrong. I watched more carefully. The man continued along the back of our neighbor's fence. Then he changed direction and moved toward the gate leading into our backyard. He did not pause near it as though he were lost. He walked directly to it. Then he began trying to open the gate. At that point, the situation was no longer harmless. This was not someone passing behind the houses. A stranger was attempting to enter our property. My dad reacted immediately. He rushed toward the gate from inside the backyard. The distance was short enough that the man should not have had time to go far. My father reached the gate and pulled it open. There was no one there. The man was gone. The dog was gone, too. There was no person walking away. There was no animal running down the path. No one was hiding beside the fence. The area outside the gate appeared empty. From the upstairs window, I had watched the man move directly toward that entrance. My father had also seen him. Our dog had barked at him. Yet when the gate opened, nothing stood on the other side. I rushed downstairs. At first, I thought perhaps the man had stepped away at the last moment. Maybe he saw my dad approaching and quickly moved behind the neighbor's fence. Perhaps he ran down the path with the dog. But there should have been some sign. The ground outside was soft enough that we expected to find footprints, disturbed grass, or marks from the dog's paws. We found nothing. There was no clear trail leading away from the gate. Nothing indicated that a person and dog had just crossed the area. My father and I searched around the property. We checked behind the fences and looked in the directions the man could have gone. There was no one nearby. The disappearance did not make sense. A person wearing dark clothing and leading a dog should have been easy to see in daylight. Even if he ran, the dog would slow him down. A lead could become tangled. The animal might bark or make noise. We heard nothing. The most disturbing part was that this was not an experience I had alone. If I had been the only person to see him, I could have blamed the fact that I had just woken up. Sleep can affect vision. A shadow, fence post, or person-shaped object might look like a man for a few seconds. I could have dreamed part of it. But my dad saw the same person. Our dog reacted as though someone was outside. 3 separate points of awareness seemed to confirm the presence. I saw the man and dog from the window. My father noticed them from the yard. Our dog barked toward them. Then they disappeared. We eventually called the police. We explained that a man had approached the property and tried to open the backyard gate. The police searched the area. They found nothing. No suspicious person was located. No one matching the description was seen nearby. There were no signs of forced entry. The gate had not been damaged. The neighbors did not report seeing anyone. No one had heard about a similar incident. There were no other stories about a man in black clothing walking a strangely unresponsive dog and approaching back gates. The situation ended without any explanation. The most likely possibility is that the man was real and escaped before my father opened the gate. The moment he realized someone was approaching, he could have stepped quickly behind the fence. The layout of the properties may have provided more hiding places than we noticed. Bushes, sheds, corners, narrow passages, or changes in ground level could allow someone to disappear from direct view. From my bedroom window, I had one angle. My father had another. Neither of us could see every part of the area at once. The man may have moved into a blind spot. If he knew the neighborhood well, he could have used a route we did not expect. The dog might have been small or well-trained enough to move quietly. A person who is deliberately trying to enter yards might already know how to avoid being seen. The lack of footprints does not prove no one was there. Soil does not always preserve clear impressions. If the ground was dry, hard, covered in grass, or disturbed by previous foot traffic, fresh tracks might be impossible to identify. A dog's paws may leave no visible marks. We may have searched quickly and overlooked them. The police arriving later would have even less chance of finding useful traces. The man may also have been checking whether the property was occupied. Some burglars approach doors or gates and test them. If someone appears, they pretend to be lost or leave quickly. Walking a dog would make him look less suspicious. The animal could serve as a cover. A person with a dog appears to be taking a normal walk rather than studying houses. The black hoodie may have concealed his face from cameras or residents. When he saw my father moving toward the gate, he may have fled. This explanation is realistic and concerning. The dog's lack of reaction could simply mean it was calm, old, tired, deaf, or well-trained. Not every dog responds to barking. Some ignore other animals entirely. What appeared unnatural might only have been unusual behavior. The clothing may also have had an ordinary explanation. The man could have been protecting himself from insects, sunlight, or scratches. He may have worked outdoors and worn clothes suitable for another environment. He could have been uncomfortable, but not concerned about the heat. The dark outfit felt suspicious because the later disappearance made every earlier detail seem important. Before he approached the gate, the clothes were only odd. After he vanished, they became part of the mystery. Another possibility is that the man did not actually try to enter our gate. He may have reached towards something nearby. From the window, I interpreted his movement as touching the latch. Perhaps he bent down, adjusted the dog's lead, moved a branch, or checked a phone. My father, already responding to our barking dog, assumed the same thing I did. When he rushed over, the man had continued walking and moved out of sight. Our shared conclusion may have been incorrect. Two people can misread the same action when watching from different distances. If my dad heard me shout or saw my reaction, one interpretation could influence the other. I do not remember exactly what was said before he ran toward the gate. Perhaps I called down that someone was trying to enter. Once he heard that, he saw the stranger's movement as an attempt to open it. The man may have been closer to another section of fence than we realized. Distance can be difficult to judge through windows and across yards. Property lines blend together, especially when fences overlap. He might have been walking behind the gate rather than directly toward it. Then he turned down another path and disappeared behind a structure. The event would feel impossible because we mentally placed him closer than he actually was. The fact that I was waking up is also important. Immediately after sleep, the brain may remain partly in a dream state. A person can look at a real scene while dream imagery continues for several seconds. This is known as a hypnopompic hallucination. I might have seen a person and dog that were not physically there. The figure could be based on shadows, fence posts, branches, or a memory of someone walking nearby. But this explanation does not account easily for my father seeing the man. It is possible that my dad saw something different. Our dog barked. My father looked toward the back fence, and I told him about the man. He may have briefly seen a dark shape and accepted my description. Later, our memories could combine into one shared event. The human mind is not a perfect recording system. People influence each other without intending to. I may have asked, "Do you see that man with the dog?" My dad may have replied yes while looking toward the general area. He might have seen a shadow, animal, or movement, but not the full figure. After the disappearance, we both remembered seeing the same thing. This would not mean either of us lied. Shared memories can become more aligned over time. The dog's barking may have started for an unrelated reason. Dogs hear and smell things humans cannot detect. It could have noticed another dog farther away, an animal behind the fence, a person in a nearby yard, or a sound we did not hear. When I saw the dark figure, I assumed the barking was directed at him. The timing connected the two events. But the dog might have been reacting to something else entirely. A squirrel, cat, raccoon, or neighbor could be hidden from our view. The strange dog I saw may have been part of a visual mistake. A moving shadow or bush could look like a four-legged animal beside a person-shaped object. If both shapes were created by poor light, distance, and my half-awake state, they would disappear when I changed position and came downstairs. My father may only have seen a dark shape near the fence rather than a clear man and dog. The wording of the story becomes more definite with retelling. At the time, it might have been less clear. Another possible explanation is that the person entered the neighbor's property rather than disappearing. He could have opened a gate, moved through a narrow passage, or gone behind a shed. When my father opened our gate, the man was already on the other side of the neighbor's fence. We searched the obvious route, but not private areas we could not access. The neighbors may have been away or unaware. By the time the police arrived, he could be several streets away. Someone walking a dog would not attract much attention from other residents. Even wearing black in summer, he would still look like an ordinary person at a distance. No neighbor seeing him would necessarily remember him later. The police finding nothing is not unusual. Without a clear direction, license plate, photograph, or detailed face, locating a pedestrian is difficult. If the person was not committing an obvious crime when found, he could simply deny approaching the gate. The absence of police evidence does not make the event paranormal. It only means the search produced no result. The man's dog might not have been a real dog. He could have been pulling or carrying something that looked like an animal from the window. A dark bag, wheeled object, or shadow beside him could create the impression of a dog. From a distance, the brain often fills in expected details. If a person walks with one arm extended downward, we assume a lead. A low shape moving beside them becomes a dog. When the person disappears behind a fence, both figures disappear together. The lack of barking or reaction from the supposed dog could be because there was no animal. But my memory is of a man clearly walking one. Without a photograph, there is no way to verify the visual detail. A more unusual possibility is that we saw a reflection. Windows can combine indoor and outdoor images. Something dark inside my room or another part of the house could reflect on the glass, appearing outside near the neighbor's fence. As I moved my head, the reflection would shift. But my father was outdoors and also noticed something. A reflection could affect me, but not him. Unless he saw a separate person or responded only to the dog, this does not explain the shared sighting. Heat distortion could also affect the view. Summer air rising from roofs, pavement, and fences can make distant objects shimmer or appear to move. A dark post or a piece of fabric might take on a human form. The apparent dog could be a shadow. As the angle changed, the figures seemed to walk toward the gate. This kind of illusion is more common over longer distances than across a backyard, but it remains possible. The supernatural explanation is that the man and dog were not ordinary living beings. They appeared along the fence, drew the attention of our dog, and moved directly toward our property. The man wore black despite the heat, because temperature did not affect him. His dog did not respond because it was not truly an animal. When my father opened the gate, both vanished. The lack of footprints and the failure of police or neighbors to find them would support the idea that they had not traveled through the area physically. Stories from many cultures describe phantom walkers, ghostly animals, and figures appearing near property boundaries. Some are seen by multiple witnesses. They may follow paths, approach gates, or behave almost normally until they disappear at close range. The gate could represent a boundary. The figure may have tried to cross into the yard but vanished when confronted. Our dog might have sensed something wrong and warned us. In that interpretation, the man was not attempting a burglary. He was trying to enter the property in another way. But this explanation depends on treating every unusual detail as evidence of something paranormal. Black clothing becomes unnatural. A calm dog becomes ghostly. The sudden disappearance becomes proof of a spirit. There are still ordinary ways for a real person to move out of sight. No impossible feature was observed clearly. The man did not walk through the fence, vanish in an open field, or appear inside the locked house. He disappeared near fences and yards, places filled with blind spots. That makes a physical escape more likely. What makes the event difficult is how short the time was. My dad was already in the backyard. He did not have to come downstairs or cross the whole house. The man began handling the gate. My father rushed toward him. There should not have been enough time for a normal person to disappear completely. The dog should also have been visible or audible. If they ran, we might expect footsteps, movement in the grass, or the sound of a lead. Instead, the other side of the gate seemed empty the instant it opened. The figure's behavior was also strange for a burglar. He approached while my father was visibly outside with a barking dog. Someone trying to sneak into a house would normally avoid an occupied yard. Even if he had not seen my dad at first, the barking should warn him. Yet he continued toward the gate. Perhaps he was confused, intoxicated, or mentally unwell. Maybe he believed he was entering another property. A person can make irrational choices without being supernatural. When he noticed my father, he fled. That remains possible. The black clothing may have made him harder to track through shaded areas. A person dressed entirely in dark fabric can disappear quickly against fences, bushes, and trees, even during daylight. The dog may also have been dark-colored. Once they moved into shadow, both could become nearly invisible. Our expectation that they should remain visible may underestimate how well the environment concealed them. The gate itself may have blocked our view for a second. When my father opened it, the moving gate could hide the person as they stepped sideways. By the time the opening was clear, they were behind the fence line. I might lose sight from the bedroom window as I rushed downstairs. During those seconds, the man had more time than it felt like. Running from upstairs to the yard takes long enough for someone already outside to reach another property. My father's search began immediately, but he still had to look in several directions. A moving person only needs one correct route to escape. Searchers have to check all possible routes. The lack of visible footprints may be less significant than it felt. Footprints are not guaranteed. Grass springs back. Hard summer soil may show nothing. Shoes with flat soles can leave no clear pattern. The police may not have treated the area like a crime scene because no entry or theft occurred. They would not cast impressions or conduct a detailed forensic search. They simply looked for a suspicious person and found none. The most reasonable explanation is that a real man approached the yard and quickly moved out of sight when my father confronted him. He may have used the dog as a reason to be walking behind properties. Perhaps he was confused about which gate belonged to whom. Maybe he intended to enter for criminal reasons and fled once noticed. The fences and neighboring yards gave him a route we did not see. The dog was unusually calm, but not impossible. No footprints remained because the surface did not preserve them. That explanation is less mysterious, but more likely. Still, the memory has never felt like a normal encounter with a trespasser. I remember looking from my bedroom window while my dad played with our dog below. The man moved slowly along the back of the neighbor's fence. His black hoodie and trousers looked wrong in the summer heat. The dog beside him did not turn its head when ours barked. It moved without curiosity or fear. The man reached our gate and began opening it. My father rushed forward. For 1 second, the gate stood between them. Then, my dad pulled it open. There was nothing on the other side. No man stepping away, no dog pulling at a lead, no movement behind the fence. I ran downstairs expecting to help search for an intruder. We checked the ground, the yards, and the nearby paths. There was no trail. The police came and found nothing. The neighbors had seen nothing. No similar sightings were reported. Maybe he escaped through a blind spot. Maybe my half-awake mind filled in details while my father saw only a distant shape. Maybe our dog barked at something else, and separate events became one shared memory. Those possibilities make sense, but they do not completely erase the final image. A man in black stands outside our gate in the middle of summer. One hand near the latch, a silent dog beside him. My father reaches the entrance only seconds later and opens it. The space beyond is empty, as though neither of them had ever been there. My cousin passed away when I was around 9 or 10 years old. A couple of years have passed since then, but the memory of what happened at my auntie's house has never completely left me. My family went there to pay our respects after his death. The house was full of the strange quiet that comes with grief. People spoke softly, moved carefully, and kept repeating the same memories about him. As a child, I did not fully understand how to behave at a gathering like that. I knew something terrible had happened. I knew my cousin was gone, and I understood that everyone was hurting. But death still felt like an idea rather than something permanent. Part of me expected him to appear from another room as if nothing had happened. That is one of the most confusing parts of losing someone when you are young. You understand the words, but your mind has not yet learned what they mean in everyday life. You hear that someone has died. Then you enter a house where their photographs, belongings, and family are still present. Everything connected to them remains, so it feels impossible that the person could be missing. At some point, I went upstairs to use the bathroom. The staircase led toward several rooms, and one of them was dark. As I climbed, I looked into it. There was a picture or painting of my cousin inside. I do not remember whether it had been placed there specifically for the gathering or whether it had always been in that room. What I remember is seeing his image in the darkness. It immediately made me think about him. I remember thinking, I wish I had spoken to him more. That thought came with guilt. I was still a child, and there was no real reason I should blame myself. Children often assume there will always be another chance to speak to someone. There will be another family gathering, another visit, another birthday, another ordinary day when you can say something that you forgot to say before. Then suddenly there is no next time. I stood near the top of the stairs, looking into that dark room, and wished I had known him better. I wished I had spent more time talking to him. Maybe I wanted one last chance to see him. I continued to the bathroom. My sisters had apparently used it before me, but I did not know anything unusual had happened to them. No one warned me. I went inside, closed the door, and did what I needed to do. For those few minutes, I probably thought about the family downstairs and the picture I had just seen. The house was unfamiliar enough that I paid attention to every doorway as I moved through it. When I came out of the bathroom, I looked toward the dark room again. My cousin was standing there. He was beside the picture of himself. I recognized him immediately. I did not see a random shadow and slowly decide it resembled him. At least, that is not how I remember it. I saw my cousin. He stood near his own image as though he had been waiting there. For a moment, I could not react. I had just been thinking about how much I regretted not speaking to him more. Then I left the bathroom and found him standing in front of me. I called his name. He looked at me. Then he smiled. He did not speak. He did not step forward or reach toward me. He simply smiled. I had no idea what to do. If I had been older, perhaps I would have remained there and tried to understand what I was seeing. Maybe I would have asked whether he was really there. But I was only 9 or 10. I knew he had died. Seeing him standing inside the house did not feel comforting in that moment. It felt impossible. I turned and ran downstairs. I wanted to get back to the adults and the rest of the family as quickly as possible. More specifically, I wanted to tell my sisters. They had gone upstairs before me, and for some reason I thought they might understand. When I reached them, I told them I had seen our cousin. I expected them to laugh, say I had imagined it, or tell me the picture had confused me. Instead, they said the same thing had happened to them. They had also seen him upstairs. That frightened me more than the sight itself. If I had been the only one, I might have accepted that grief had made me imagine him. But my sisters had gone upstairs before me. They claimed they had seen him, too. As far as I knew, they had not told me before I entered the bathroom. I had not copied their story. They had not suggested that I should expect to see him. 3 of us apparently walked through the same upstairs area and saw our dead cousin. I was frightened for weeks. Even though he had smiled, the experience did not feel entirely peaceful. I kept thinking about the fact that he was supposed to be gone. If he could stand beside his picture in that dark room, then perhaps death did not stop people from appearing. Maybe he could appear in my bedroom. Maybe I would wake at night and find him watching me. I did not think he wanted to hurt me, But that did not make the idea less frightening. A familiar person appearing where no living person should be is still terrifying. The most comforting interpretation is that my cousin came to say goodbye. Perhaps he knew I regretted not speaking to him more. Maybe the thought I had on the stairs was somehow heard. He appeared beside his own picture, so I would recognize him. He smiled instead of speaking because there was nothing else he needed to say. He may also have appeared to my sisters because they had their own grief and regrets. In that interpretation, the experience was not a haunting or warning. It was one final family moment, a goodbye given to children who were not ready to understand death. That is a meaningful way to remember it. But there are also ordinary explanations. The first is that the picture itself may have caused the experience. The room was dark, and there was an image of my cousin inside it. When someone looks at a face in poor lighting, the brain can make the face seem more lifelike than it is. Shadows can create the appearance of a body beside or beneath a portrait. Clothing, furniture, curtains, or another object may form a human outline. Because I was already thinking about my cousin, my brain was prepared to see him. I had just looked at the picture and wished I could speak to him. After leaving the bathroom, I returned to the same view. The picture and surrounding shadows may have combined into the figure I expected or wanted to see. The human brain is extremely good at recognizing faces and bodies, even when the visual information is incomplete. This is called pareidolia. A coat becomes a person. A curtain becomes a face. A group of shadows becomes someone standing in a doorway. Usually, the mistake disappears when the person looks more closely or turns on a light. But I did not stay long enough to examine the figure. I called his name, saw what I interpreted as a smile, and ran. I never gave the image a chance to become an ordinary object. The smile may also have been part of the picture. If the portrait showed my cousin smiling, changes in my angle or the light could make the expression seem to move. Faces in photographs sometimes appear different, depending on where the viewer stands. The eyes seem to follow you. A smile appears wider. Shadows shift across the cheeks and mouth. In a dark room, those changes can seem like a living response. I called his name and expected recognition. The face appeared to smile because my mind interpreted the existing expression as reacting to me. That does not mean I lied. The experience could feel completely real while still being a visual misinterpretation. Grief makes this more likely. When someone dies, the brain continues expecting them to exist. You may think you see them in crowds. A stranger with similar hair or clothing briefly becomes them. You hear a familiar voice in another room. You dream that they are alive and wake confused. These experiences are common because the brain has not yet updated its understanding of the world. For years, it learned that your cousin was a living person who might appear at family gatherings. Then, suddenly, everyone says he is gone. The brain does not erase its old expectations immediately. At my auntie's house, surrounded by his family and pictures, I may have been especially likely to see him. The environment was full of reminders. Every conversation was about him. The dark room contained his image. My own regret made me want another interaction. My mind may have created one. The fact that my sisters reported the same thing complicates this explanation, but it does not make it impossible. They were in the same house, experiencing the same grief, walking past the same dark room, and looking at the same picture. If the lighting and objects created a convincing human shape, all three of us could interpret it in the same way. We shared the same visual conditions and the same knowledge. The figure did not need to be supernatural for several people to make the same mistake. There is also the possibility that one of us influenced the others without realizing it. My sisters went upstairs before me. They may have discussed what they saw between themselves or behaved strangely when they came downstairs. I might have noticed their expressions, fear, or whispered conversation without consciously remembering it. That could create an expectation that something was upstairs. Even if they never directly told me, subtle cues may have influenced me. Then, when I saw the picture in the dark room, my mind completed the story. The same influence could have worked in the opposite direction after I returned. I told them I had seen our cousin. They may have already experienced something unclear upstairs, a shadow, a picture, or a feeling of being watched. Hearing my story gave their experiences a definite identity. They then said the same thing happened to them because my description matched what they had been trying to understand. This would not mean they deliberately copied me. Memory can change quickly when people compare experiences. Imagine one sister saw a shape near the picture. The other felt uneasy but saw nothing clearly. Then, I ran downstairs saying our cousin was standing there. Suddenly, both could remember the shape as him. The shared version becomes stronger each time it is repeated. Years later, all three of us may honestly remember seeing the same figure, even if the original experiences were not identical. I do not know whether we compared details carefully. Did they see him standing in the exact same place? Did he smile at them too? Were his clothes the same? Did they call his name? Did they see a full body or only a face? Those differences would matter. But childhood memories often preserve only the central conclusion. We saw him. The smaller details fade. There may also have been a living person upstairs. A family member with a similar height, build, or clothing could have stood near the room. In darkness and grief, I might mistake them for my cousin. When I called his name, the person smiled, perhaps confused or trying to reassure me. Then I ran before realizing who they were. My sisters could have made the same mistake if they saw the same person earlier. However, this explanation seems less likely if the upstairs area was otherwise empty and no one admitted being there. A person would also probably respond when called by the wrong name. They might say, "It's me," or ask what was wrong. The silent smile feels more dreamlike or memory-based. Another possibility is that I experienced a brief dissociative or dreamlike moment. Grief, tiredness, emotional stress, and unfamiliar surroundings can create altered perception. I may have been awake, but temporarily disconnected from my surroundings. The thought about wishing I had spoken to him more was emotionally powerful. When I came out of the bathroom, my mind could have produced a vivid image of him. This would be more like a waking vision than a simple shadow. The brain can create a familiar person with surprising clarity, especially after loss. Some grieving people report seeing the deceased sitting in a favorite chair, standing in a doorway, or walking through a familiar room. These experiences do not necessarily indicate mental illness. They may happen once and never return. The vision can be comforting or frightening depending on the situation. My age may have made the boundary between imagination, memory, and perception less stable. Children can form vivid internal images that briefly feel external. The figure may have appeared because I needed a response to my regret. I wished I had spoken to him more. My mind gave me a moment where he saw me and smiled. In psychological terms, that could be a way of resolving guilt. The smile might mean forgiveness. It tells the child that the cousin is not angry and that the missed conversations do not matter anymore. Whether the figure existed physically or not, the experience may have served an emotional purpose. It could have been my brain trying to protect me from grief. The supernatural interpretation remains powerful because of the timing. I thought about him. Then I saw him. He stood beside his own picture. almost as though he had stepped out of it. I called his name, and he responded with a smile. My sisters independently claimed to have seen him too. If spirits can appear after death, this would look exactly like a brief goodbye. He did not behave violently. He did not try to frighten anyone. He appeared in the family home during the gathering held for him. That would be the most natural place for him to return. Perhaps he wanted to see everyone together one final time. Maybe children noticed him because they were more open to the possibility, less distracted by adult responsibilities, or less likely to explain away what they saw. Some people believe the dead visit shortly after passing to reassure family members. The smile would fit that interpretation. He may have been saying that he was all right, but there is no way to prove that. We did not take a photograph. No adult reported seeing him. There was no physical interaction. The figure disappeared or was no longer visible when anyone returned upstairs. The experience depended on memory, darkness, emotion, and a room containing his picture. Those conditions strongly support a psychological or visual explanation. The fact that the three of us were children also matters. Children can influence one another quickly. We may have been frightened by the house, the funeral atmosphere, or the idea of death. One child's story can spread through a group and become a shared experience. But I do not remember inventing anything for attention. I was genuinely frightened. My sisters seemed genuinely frightened too. Whatever caused it, none of us treated it as a joke. I sometimes wonder whether my auntie or another adult knew about the room. Perhaps the picture had been arranged with clothing or personal belongings beneath it, creating a memorial display that looked like a standing figure in low light. Maybe a jacket hung near the photograph. Perhaps flowers, curtains, and furniture formed a body-shaped silhouette. Adults viewing it in daylight would see a normal memorial. Children passing in darkness might see the deceased person standing beside his own image. If all three of us viewed the same arrangement from the bathroom doorway, the illusion could repeat almost perfectly. That is one of the strongest practical explanations. It would also explain why the figure appeared in a specific location and nowhere else. The room itself created him. The smile was already in the picture. The darkness hid the boundary between photograph and surrounding objects. Each child's mind completed the body. Still, I remember him as separate from the picture. He was standing next to it, not inside it. I believed I saw a living-size version of my cousin beside his own image. Memories can become more definite over time, but that distinction has remained. I did not think the painting moved. I thought he was there. The fact that I had just wished I had spoken to him more makes the experience feel like an answer. If it was only a hallucination, it was perfectly timed. But the brain is capable of perfect timing because it creates the thought and the image. My regret activated memories of my cousin. Those memories made me more likely to see him. The sequence feels supernatural, but the emotional connection itself may have caused the perception. I think the most likely explanation is that grief, darkness, and the memorial image created a powerful visual experience. The same setting affected my sisters. We may have independently misidentified the same shapes, or our memories may have influenced one another afterward. It is also possible that I experienced a brief grief-related vision. The sight was real to me without requiring my cousin to be physically present. That explanation respects the experience without claiming certainty about something impossible to verify. But part of me still holds on to the goodbye. I was a child walking through a house filled with mourning. I looked into a dark room and saw my cousin's picture. I thought about all the conversations we would never have. I wished I had spoken to him more. Then I left the bathroom and saw him standing beside that picture. I called his name. He smiled. There was no anger in his face, no accusation, no sign that he blamed me for not knowing him better. Only a smile. I ran because I was too young and too frightened to remain there. When I told my sisters, they said they had seen him too. For weeks, I thought about the fact that 3 of us might have witnessed something from a world we did not understand. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe the picture and objects in the room created the shape. Maybe grief made all of us see the person we wanted to see. Those explanations are possible, and probably more likely than a spirit appearing beside a portrait. But I still return to the timing. I did not go upstairs hoping to see a ghost. I only had one private thought. I wish I had spoken to him more. Then, when I came out of the bathroom, he was there. He did not give me a speech or explain what death was like. He simply looked at me and smiled, as though that was the only answer I needed.
We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal.
I was still young when this happened, but I remember that evening more clearly than many events from around the same age. Nothing violent happened, and I never actually saw anyone inside the house. Even so, the experience frightened me enough that I spent the rest of the night unable to relax. It happened on the day of my older sister's prom. My sister and several of her friends needed somewhere large enough to get ready together. Our own house was too small to comfortably hold that many people, especially with dresses, makeup, bags, shoes, and everything else they had brought with them. My grandmother's house had much more space, so everyone decided to meet there. The house stood in a wooded area on a steep hill. It was not completely isolated, but it felt that way, especially when you were young. The road leading to it climbed through thick trees, and the property seemed separated from the surrounding world. From certain parts of the house, all you could see were woods. During the day, the place could feel peaceful. Sunlight came through the trees. Birds moved between the branches, and the hill gave the property a private, quiet feeling. But as evening approached, the same surroundings could become unsettling. The trees blocked a lot of the remaining light. Shadows formed quickly around the yard, and the woods made it difficult to see far beyond the property. Sounds could come from anywhere without showing their source. My grandmother's house itself was large enough for all the girls to spread out. Most of the prom preparation was happening in the basement. My sister and her friends had taken over the area with dresses, hair products, mirrors, makeup, and bags. There were enough teenage girls down there that the house should have felt crowded and safe. They were talking loudly, laughing, moving around, and helping one another get ready. There was no reason for me to feel afraid. Still, when my mom said she needed to leave for a while to buy something, I became extremely nervous. I do not remember exactly what she needed from the store. It was probably something related to the prom preparations, something one of the girls had forgotten or suddenly realized they needed. Whatever it was, my mother planned to leave the house and return shortly afterward. For some reason, I did not want her to go without me. I had an entire group of teenage girls in the basement. My sister was there. Her friends were there. I was not going to be left completely alone. But that did not matter. I had a strong feeling that I should not stay behind. It was not based on anything I had seen or heard, No strange sound had come from upstairs. No one had warned us about the house. Nothing unusual had happened earlier that day. I simply felt scared. The fear came suddenly and without a clear reason. I tried to tell myself I was being childish. With so many people in the house, there was almost no chance of anything happening to me. If I heard a noise, I could go downstairs and stay with my sister and her friends. Even so, the idea of watching my mother drive away made me deeply uncomfortable. I insisted on going with her. Looking back, I am glad I did. Before we could leave, my mom asked me to switch off the light upstairs. The upstairs section of the house was more like a loft than a normal second floor. It was an open area above the main part of the home, with one window that could be seen clearly from the driveway. Because of the way the house sat on the steep hill, that upstairs window was easy to notice when you approached the property by car. The light was still on, and my mother did not want to leave it burning unnecessarily. I ran upstairs to turn it off. At that point, I was already nervous about being in the house without my mother, so I did not spend any more time upstairs than necessary. Still, I remember looking around the room. It was fairly clean. There were a few toys lying on the floor, but nothing else seemed out of place. I do not remember seeing food, rubbish, wrappers, or anything that looked as though someone had recently been sitting there. The area was empty. I crossed the room, reached for the light switch, and turned it off. The loft became dark. I left immediately and went back downstairs. I told my mother I had switched the light off, and then the two of us left the house. My sister and her friends remained in the basement, continuing to get ready. I was relieved to be going with my mom. Once I was inside the car and we were driving away, the fear I had felt began to seem foolish. Nothing had happened. The house was full of people, and the upstairs room had been empty. I tried to forget the nervous feeling. We drove to buy whatever was needed. I do not remember much about the trip. It was probably short and uneventful. We went to the store, found the item, paid for it, and drove back toward my grandmother's house. By the time we returned, the light outside had faded further. The woods surrounding the property were darker, and the steep driveway rose ahead of us. As our car turned toward the house, I looked up. The upstairs window was visible from the driveway. The light was on. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. I had personally switched it off before we left. I remembered entering the loft, looking around, and reaching for the switch. I remembered the room going dark. Yet the window above us was glowing. My mother noticed it too. She looked toward the loft and said, "I thought you turned the upstairs light off." I told her that I had. There was no uncertainty in my answer. I had not forgotten. I had not walked upstairs and come back without touching the switch. The only reason I had gone up there was to turn the light off. I remembered doing it. The obvious explanation was that someone else had turned it back on. My sister and her friends were still in the house, so one of them could easily have gone upstairs. That should have made the situation completely normal. Maybe one of the girls needed more space to fix her hair or change clothes. Maybe someone went upstairs looking for something. Maybe they switched on the light and forgot to turn it off again. I tried to believe that, but I was still uneasy. The fear I had felt before leaving returned immediately. My mother parked, and we went inside. The basement was still full of noise and activity. My sister and her friends were talking and preparing for prom as if nothing unusual had happened. I do not remember hearing anyone say they had gone upstairs. Maybe we asked them. Maybe we assumed one of them had been there. That part is less clear now. What I do remember is going back to the loft. I wanted to see why the light was on. The moment I reached the upstairs room, I noticed something that had not been there before. There were fruit snack wrappers on the floor. They stood out because I had looked around before leaving. The room had not been perfectly empty. There had been toys scattered on the ground, but I did not remember seeing any wrappers. Now several of them were lying there. They looked as if someone had eaten fruit snacks while we were gone and dropped the empty packaging onto the floor. I froze. The light being on could have had a simple explanation. One of the girls might have gone upstairs. The wrappers could also have had a simple explanation. Maybe I had missed them the first time. Maybe they had been partly hidden among the toys and only became noticeable after I returned. But the two things together frightened me. Before leaving, I had entered a fairly clean room with only a few toys on the floor. I had turned off the light and walked away. When we returned, the light was on and rubbish had appeared in the room. It looked as though someone had spent time there while we were gone. The problem was that no one was supposed to be upstairs. My sister and all her friends had been getting ready in the basement. The house was active and noisy below, but the loft was away from everyone else. Anyone entering it would have been alone and out of sight. I began wondering whether someone had been inside the house without us knowing. That thought was far more frightening than the idea of a ghost. My grandmother's home was surrounded by woods. A stranger could have approached from behind the property without easily being seen from the road. The trees provided plenty of cover. If someone knew the house was full of people distracted by prom preparations, they might have entered quietly and hidden upstairs. But how would they have entered without anyone hearing them? The girls were in the basement, and the house was noisy. It was possible that a door could have opened without attracting attention. Someone might have come in while my mother and I were gone. They could have walked upstairs, turned on the light, eaten something they found, and left before we returned. Yet there was no obvious evidence of a break-in. No one reported seeing a stranger. Nothing important seemed to be missing. The only things that had changed were the light and the wrappers. I tried to ask whether one of the girls had gone upstairs. I do not remember receiving a clear answer. No one seemed concerned, which only made me feel more isolated in my fear. To everyone else, it was probably a small detail that did not matter. Someone had likely switched on a light and dropped a snack wrapper. End of story. But I had been the last person upstairs before we left. I remembered how the room looked. I remembered the floor being mostly clear apart from toys. I remembered the light going out. The scene I returned to was different. I became frightened enough that I did not want to stay alone anywhere in the house. For the rest of the night, I remained close to other people. Even with my sister's friends around, I kept thinking about the loft. Every time I heard movement, above or behind me, I wondered whether someone was still in the house. I imagined a person hiding in another room, waiting for the noise from the prom group to cover their movements. I imagined someone standing in the loft after I switched off the light, hidden in a corner I had not checked. Maybe they had already been there when I entered. Perhaps I had walked into the room, looked quickly at the floor, turned off the light, and left without noticing a person watching me. That possibility terrified me. The loft had seemed empty, but I had not searched it carefully. I had been in a hurry to leave with my mother. I had not checked behind furniture, inside closets, or anywhere else someone might hide. What if my fear before leaving had not been random? What if I had sensed that someone was already inside the house? I know that sounds dramatic. Children often become frightened in unfamiliar or isolated places. The woods, the steep hill, and the darkening evening could have created that feeling without any real danger. But the timing still bothers me. I became frightened before anything unusual happened. I did not want my mother to leave me there, even though many other people were in the basement. Then I went upstairs, saw the room, and switched off the light. When we returned, the light was back on, and the wrappers had appeared. It felt as though the fear had been warning me. Another possibility is that the cause was not human. Maybe the house had some kind of electrical problem. A faulty switch might have caused the light to come back on by itself. That can happen if wiring is loose or damaged, but that does not explain the fruit snack wrappers. Maybe the wrappers had already been there. At my age, I could easily have overlooked them. I was nervous and moving quickly. Perhaps my memory made the room seem cleaner than it really was. That is the most reasonable explanation. One of the girls could also have gone upstairs after we left, turned on the light, eaten the fruit snacks, and then returned to the basement without thinking it was important enough to mention. Maybe she forgot doing it in the confusion of getting ready for prom. There were probably many people moving around that evening. It would not be surprising if someone briefly left the basement. Over the years, I have tried to accept that version. Someone went upstairs. Someone turned on the light. Someone left the wrappers. Nothing paranormal happened. But if that was the case, why did no one immediately admit it? If my mother had asked the group who turned the light on, a normal response would have been for someone to say, "I did. I needed something upstairs." I do not remember anyone saying that. Instead, the event remained unexplained. The age of the people in the house also matters. These were teenage girls preparing for prom, not young children hiding and playing tricks. They were focused on their hair, makeup, dresses, pictures, and getting ready to leave. The upstairs loft offered no obvious reason for them to go there. Most of what they needed was already in the basement. Maybe one of them had brought the fruit snacks and wandered upstairs for a moment. That is possible. But no one claimed the wrappers. My fear grew throughout the evening. I kept looking toward the stairs. I expected the light to turn on again. I expected to hear footsteps moving above us. At times, I imagined someone looking down from the loft into the lower part of the house. Even when nothing happened, I could not relax. The fact that everyone else continued with the prom preparations made the situation stranger. The basement was filled with normal activity. Girls were laughing, fixing their hair, helping with dresses, and taking pictures. Meanwhile, I felt as if something was wrong upstairs. It was like 2 different evenings were happening inside the same house. Downstairs was a happy family event. Upstairs was an empty room where a light had turned itself on and food wrappers had appeared. I do not remember anything else unusual happening that night. No one found a stranger inside the house. Nothing else moved. There were no unexplained voices, footsteps, or doors opening. The girls eventually finished getting ready and left for the prom. The house returned to normal. That should have made it easy for me to forget the incident. Instead, it stayed with me. As I grew older, I began questioning my memory. Maybe the wrappers had been there from the beginning. Children do not always notice every detail in a room. I may have seen them, but failed to register them. Maybe I only remembered the room as clean because the wrappers became important later. Memory can change after a frightening event. Once I saw the light on, I may have convinced myself that the upstairs room had looked different before. I understand that. But the light remains harder to dismiss. I went upstairs for one specific reason. My mother told me to turn it off. I did. When we returned, it was on again. Someone or something had changed it. The simplest explanation is that one of the girls did it. Still, I cannot forget how frightened I felt before leaving the house. That fear arrived without warning. I had no reason to believe I was in danger, but I strongly wanted to stay with my mother. I did not want her to leave me, even though there was an army of teenage girls nearby. It felt almost like instinct. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed behind. Would I have gone upstairs after seeing the light? Would I have heard someone moving around while everyone else remained in the basement? Would I have discovered who left the wrappers? Or would nothing have happened at all? Maybe my presence would have prevented anyone from going upstairs. Maybe the light would have remained off, and the experience would never have become a memory. There's also the possibility that someone had been watching the house from the woods. The property's location made that idea possible. A person could have approached without being visible from the driveway. They might have waited until my mother and I left, believing the house was empty or less occupied than it was. But entering a house full of teenage girls would have been risky. If the person only wanted food or shelter, why turn on the loft light where they could be seen from the driveway? Why leave wrappers in plain sight? And how did they escape without anyone noticing? A ghost seems even harder to prove. There was no history attached to the event that I knew about. I did not know of anyone who had died in the house, and I had never heard stories about the loft being haunted. The light and the wrappers were the only unusual signs. Maybe something unseen had been sitting upstairs eating fruit snacks while we were away. That sounds ridiculous when said aloud. But at the time, the wrappers felt like evidence that someone had been there. Not a shadow, not a noise, not a feeling. A physical object had appeared in a place where I was sure it had not been before. I was traumatized for the rest of that night. I stayed close to my mother whenever I could. I avoided being alone, especially near the stairs. If I needed something from another room, I wanted someone to come with me. The loft no longer felt like a simple upstairs play area. It felt occupied. Even when the light was off, I imagined someone moving around in the darkness. I never received an answer. No one admitted turning the light on. No one explained the fruit snack wrappers. Nothing else happened that proved whether the cause had been a forgetful teenager, an intruder, faulty memory, or something paranormal. All I had was the sequence of events. I felt deeply afraid when my mother said she was leaving. Before we left, I checked the upstairs room and turned off its light. The room was mostly clean, apart from a few toys. When we returned, the light was shining through the loft window. Upstairs, fruit snack wrappers were lying on the floor. Maybe there's a simple explanation. One of my sister's friends could have gone upstairs while we were gone and forgotten about it. I may have overlooked the wrappers the first time. Those answers are reasonable. But whenever I remember pulling into the driveway and seeing that light glowing above us, I feel the same cold fear I felt as a child. I know I turned it off. And when I returned to that room, something had changed. One night, while I was still living at my parents' house, I stayed up much later than everyone else watching television. The house had already gone quiet. My parents had gone to bed, the lights in most of the rooms were off, and I was sitting alone in front of the television, letting one program run into the next. I was not watching anything especially frightening. I was simply not tired enough to go to sleep yet. My bedroom was separate from the main part of the house, so to reach it, I had to open the door and go outside. It was a normal arrangement for us, and I had made that short walk many times before. I knew the yard, the distance between the buildings, and every shadow around the doorway. There was no reason for me to be nervous. Eventually, I became tired and decided it was time to go to bed. I turned off the television, stood up from the couch, and walked toward the door. The house felt unusually still after the television went silent. For a moment, I could hear nothing except the small background sounds of the building. The refrigerator hummed somewhere nearby. The floor creaked beneath my weight as I crossed the room. I reached the door and opened it. A woman's face was waiting on the other side. It appeared so close to me that I nearly walked directly into it. Her face was only about 2 feet away from mine, floating in the darkness outside the doorway. I did not see her approach. I did not hear footsteps or movement before opening the door. 1 second, there was nothing but the closed door. The next, She was directly in front of me. I could see mainly her face and part of her shoulders. There did not seem to be much of a body beneath them, or at least nothing I could clearly make out in the darkness. Her appearance was difficult to describe without making it sound ridiculous. She looked like a wild, unhealthy witch, but without the pointed hat or costume people usually imagine. Her face looked aged and damaged. Her skin seemed rough, and her features were sharp and unnatural. There was something deeply wrong with the way she looked. She did not appear like an ordinary woman who had walked up to the house. She looked more like the face of someone who had been awake for days, staring too long without blinking. I remember her eyes most clearly. They were fixed on me. She did not look surprised that I had opened the door. She did not step back or react like a person who had been caught standing outside someone's home. She simply stared. I was completely frozen. My body stopped responding before I even understood what I was seeing. I could not step backward. I could not close the door. I could not call for my parents. My hand remained on or near the door while I stared at her. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The moment felt much longer than it probably was. My mind tried to find an explanation, but there was no time to think clearly. I wondered whether a real woman had entered the yard. Maybe someone was lost. Maybe someone was trying to frighten me. But there was no reason for a stranger to be standing directly outside the door in the middle of the night. There were also details about her that did not seem physical. I could not see her clearly enough below the shoulders. She did not seem to cast the kind of shadow a normal person would. There was no sound of breathing, clothing moving, or feet shifting on the ground. She was only a face in the darkness. Then she vanished. She did not turn away or step to the side. There was no movement toward the yard. She was there, and then she was not. The space in front of the door became empty. I continued staring at the same place, unable to move. Even though the woman was gone, I expected her to appear again. I imagined her face suddenly moving back into the doorway or showing up beside the house. Nothing happened. The yard remained dark and silent. Eventually, the fear released its grip enough for me to move. I did not investigate. I did not walk outside to see where she had gone. I did not call into the darkness or check around the building. I closed the door immediately. There was no chance I was going outside to reach my room after seeing that face. I turned around and went back into the main part of the house. The couch suddenly seemed like the safest place in the world. I stayed there for the rest of the night. I did not want to wake my parents and explain what I had seen, partly because I was still trying to understand it myself. I knew how the story would sound. I had been awake late. I had been sitting in front of a television. I opened a door and claimed to see a woman with almost no body floating outside. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes had needed time to adjust to the darkness. Maybe a shadow, tree branch, or object near the doorway had briefly looked like a face. Those were the explanations I tried to give myself. None of them felt convincing. The face had been too close and too detailed. It had not been a shape far across the yard. I had seen it directly in front of me. I remembered the expression. I remembered the shoulders. I remembered the way it stared without reacting. Most of all, I remembered the exact moment it disappeared. I stayed awake on the couch for a long time, listening for anything outside. There were no footsteps around the house. No one knocked on the door. Nothing touched the windows. Eventually, I fell asleep. But I did not sleep well. For the next several days, I felt nervous whenever I had to walk outside at night. Every time I opened that door, I expected the face to be waiting there again. I began turning on lights before going outside. Sometimes I would look through a window first, checking the yard for movement. I never saw the woman again. Weeks passed. Then, months. Nothing else happened, and the fear slowly faded. I began to convince myself that the encounter had been caused by exhaustion. Perhaps I had been half asleep and imagined the face during the sudden change from indoor light to darkness. It was easier to think that than to believe something had been standing outside my parents' house. A few months later, I had another experience. This one happened inside my bedroom. I had gone to sleep normally that night. At some point, I began having a terrible nightmare. I no longer remember the details of the dream. I only remember the fear and the feeling of being trapped inside it. I knew I was dreaming. That was the strange part. Somewhere in my mind, I understood that what I was seeing was not real. I knew I needed to wake up. I tried to force my eyes open. Nothing happened. I tried again. The nightmare continued. I could feel myself struggling to escape it, but every attempt seemed to pull me deeper into the dream. It was like being underwater and trying to reach the surface while something held my legs. I told myself to wake up. I tried moving my arms, I tried turning my head, I tried shouting. Nothing worked. My body would not respond. The more I fought, the more frightened I became. I began to feel as if I might never wake up. I do not know how long the struggle lasted. It could have been only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Finally, my eyes opened. The nightmare disappeared, and I could see my bedroom. For one brief moment, I felt relief. Then I saw the two creatures standing over me. They were beside or above the bed, leaning close enough that I knew they were looking directly at me. I wish I could describe exactly what they looked like. I cannot. Their appearance is one of the strangest parts of the memory. I know I saw them, and I remember the fear of looking at them, but the details of their bodies and faces are difficult to hold on to. Whenever I try to picture them now, the image becomes unclear. They were not human. At least, they did not feel human. There was something about their shapes, the way they stood, and the way they watched me that made me believe they were creatures rather than people. They did not look like my parents or anyone I knew. They were not burglars standing beside the bed. They seemed unnatural. Both figures stared down at me. There was something creepy and almost curious in the way they looked. They did not immediately attack me. They did not speak. They simply watched. I stared back at them because I could do nothing else. My entire body was paralyzed. I could not sit up. I could not move my hands or legs. I could not turn away. All I could move were my eyes. The room looked real around them. I could see the familiar walls, furniture, and darkness of my bedroom. This did not feel like the nightmare continuing. I believed I was completely awake. That made the creatures much more frightening. If I had still been dreaming, they could not hurt me. But if I was awake, then two unknown things were standing over my bed while I was unable to move. The creatures remained there for several seconds. It may have been longer. Time becomes difficult to measure when you are terrified and paralyzed. I tried to breathe quietly. I did not want to attract their attention, even though they were already looking directly at me. I tried to call out for help. Nothing came from my mouth. My throat would not work. I tried moving one finger. There was no response. The creatures continued staring. Then they disappeared. Like the woman outside the door, they did not walk away. They did not move toward another part of the room. They simply vanished. One moment, they were leaning over me. The next, the area beside the bed was empty. I expected the paralysis to end immediately. It did not. I remained unable to move for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. At least, that was how long it felt. I lay there staring into the darkness, waiting for the creatures to return. My body felt heavy and disconnected. I could breathe, but even that seemed difficult because I was so frightened. Slowly, feeling began to return. I moved my fingers first. Then I managed to move one arm. Eventually, I could turn my head and shift beneath the blankets. I sat up only after I was certain I had control of my body again. The bedroom was empty. There was no sign that anyone had entered. The door was still closed. Nothing had been moved. I checked the floor beside the bed, expecting to find marks or some evidence that the creatures had been there. There was nothing. I was too afraid to get up and search the entire room. Instead, I pulled the blankets over my head. I know that sounds childish, but at that moment, hiding beneath the covers felt like the only protection I had. I tried to fall asleep again. Every sound made me tense. I imagined the creatures standing silently beside the bed, waiting for me to look out. I kept the covers over my face for a long time. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I slept. The next morning, the room looked completely normal. In daylight, it was difficult to believe that anything had stood over me. I began searching for an explanation. The second experience sounded a lot like sleep paralysis. During sleep paralysis, a person becomes mentally awake before the body fully leaves its sleeping state. They may be unable to move, and they can see or hear things that are not physically present. That would explain the nightmare. It would explain why I struggled to wake up. It would also explain why I saw strange figures beside the bed and remained unable to move after they disappeared. Knowing that makes the second incident easier to understand. It does not make the memory less frightening. At the time, I did not know what sleep paralysis was. I believed I had opened my eyes and found two creatures watching me. Even now, part of me wonders why they appeared the way they did. Why two? Why were they leaning over me? Why did they seem to be studying me? The brain can create terrifying images during sleep paralysis, but understanding the process does not explain why a specific image appears. It also does not fully explain the first encounter. I had been awake and walking through the house when I saw the woman outside. I was not lying in bed or waking from a dream. I had turned off the television, stood up, crossed the room, and opened the door. The face appeared while I was standing. That does not match sleep paralysis. Maybe the first experience was a waking hallucination caused by exhaustion. People can see things when they are extremely tired. The sudden darkness outside may have caused my brain to create a face from random shapes. That is possible. But the woman seemed so real that I froze in place. She was not vague. I saw her staring back at me. I have sometimes wondered whether the two events were connected. Maybe the woman outside and the creatures in my bedroom were all part of the same problem. Perhaps something had attached itself to me or followed me from the doorway. That idea is terrifying, but there is no evidence for it. The experiences happened months apart. Nothing unusual occurred between them. After the second incident, I did not see the woman or the creatures again. There were no more faces outside. There were no more figures standing over my bed. The events stopped as suddenly as they began. That should be comforting. Instead, the fact that they happened only once each makes them difficult to explain. If I regularly saw figures, I might assume there was a medical or psychological cause. If strange things happened throughout the house, I might believe the place was haunted. But there were only two incidents. One involved a woman's face appearing outside a door. The other involved two creatures watching me during what was probably sleep paralysis. Nothing else followed. I do not tell many people about these experiences. The story sounds unbelievable, and I know some people will laugh. They may say I was dreaming both times. They may say I was tired, confused, or imagining things. Those explanations may be correct. I cannot provide proof. I did not take a photograph of the woman. I did not record the creatures. No one else was present during either incident. All I have is the memory. The first encounter still feels especially vivid. I remember opening the door. I remember seeing the face directly in front of mine. I remember how little of her body I could see. I remember her cracked, witch-like appearance and the way she vanished without moving. The second incident is less clear visually, but the fear remains just as strong. I remember fighting to escape the nightmare. I remember finally opening my eyes. I remember two shapes leaning over me. I remember knowing they were staring. Then I remember lying helplessly in the bed after they disappeared, waiting for my body to move again. Even if both events had normal explanations, they changed the way I felt about darkness for a long time. I became more careful when opening doors at night. I sometimes checked the room before sleeping. If I woke suddenly, I would look around to make sure nothing was standing beside the bed. I never saw anything again. Years have passed since then, but I still become uncomfortable when I think about those nights. The woman outside felt as if she had been waiting for me to open the door. The creatures felt as if they had been waiting for me to wake up. Maybe that was only how fear shaped the memories. Maybe the woman was a shadow, and the creatures were part of sleep paralysis. That is the explanation I usually accept. But when I remember how close that face was to mine, it becomes difficult to believe I imagined everything. I had opened the door expecting an empty yard. Instead, something was standing 2 feet away, staring directly at me. Months later, I opened my eyes expecting to escape a nightmare. 2 creatures were already waiting above my bed. I have not seen any of them since. I hope I never do. When I was younger, I suddenly found myself needing somewhere new to live as quickly as possible. The landlord of the house I was renting had decided he no longer wanted several young roommates living on his property. He wanted to rent the entire place to one family instead, so he gave all of us 30 days to leave. Everyone else managed to find somewhere before I did. By the 29th day, I was the last person still living in the house. Most of the rooms were empty. My former roommates had already packed their things and moved on, leaving me alone with a deadline that was only a day away. I had spent weeks looking at listings, calling landlords, and trying to find somewhere affordable, but nothing had worked out. Then I found a room in another house. The rent was higher than I wanted to pay, and slightly beyond what I could comfortably afford, but I did not have many choices left. I could either accept it or risk having nowhere to go once the 30 days were over. The owners had recently moved out and decided to rent the rooms individually. Their plan was to give college students and younger people a cheaper place to live instead of renting the whole house to one person. The house itself seemed fine. It was in a normal residential area and did not appear abandoned or badly maintained. There were neighboring houses nearby, a front yard, a backyard, and a metal gate at the front of the property. Nothing about it looked frightening. Because no one else had moved in yet, I was able to choose whichever bedroom I wanted. I picked one upstairs. It was the only upstairs room with a clear view of the front yard. I liked being able to look outside and see who was approaching the house. The room was also far enough from the common areas that I thought it would be quiet. On my first day, I carried in my belongings and tried to settle down. The house felt strange only because it was empty. An empty house always sounds different from one filled with people. Every footstep echoes. Pipes become louder. Doors seem to close more heavily. When the walls are not covered with pictures and the rooms are not full of furniture, even small sounds travel farther. I told myself I would get used to it once the other tenants moved in. That first night, I went upstairs and tried to sleep. It was sometime around midnight when I heard the banging. It came suddenly and was loud enough to make me sit up in bed. Bam, 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 bam. It sounded like someone was pounding on the front door with both fists. From my bedroom window, I could see much of the front yard, but the actual front door was beneath me and slightly out of view. I could not look directly down and see who was standing there. I remained still for a few seconds, listening. My first thought was that it might be the wind. I did not know the house well yet. Maybe a loose shutter, branch, or part of the gate was hitting the wall. The noise could have been coming from somewhere near the door rather than from the door itself. But the rhythm did not sound random. It sounded deliberate. Someone or something was striking the entrance in short groups. The banging continued for around 15 seconds. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was immediate. I sat in bed, staring toward my bedroom door. I waited for someone to knock again or call out. Nothing happened. I considered staying upstairs and ignoring it. It was late, I was alone, and I had no idea who might be outside. Opening the door would have been foolish. At the same time, I worried that someone genuinely needed help. Maybe one of the owners had come by. Maybe a neighbor had seen something. Maybe the police or emergency services were outside. I reached beside my bed and grabbed what I called my bed knife. It was only a small switchblade, but keeping it near me made me feel safer when I was alone. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. Before going downstairs, I turned on the light. Then, I turned on the next one. I continued switching on every light I passed as I made my way toward the entrance. I knew that announcing my movement through the house was probably not the smartest thing to do if someone dangerous was outside, but I did not want to walk through an unfamiliar building in darkness. The house remained silent. When I reached the front door, I held the knife close and looked through the peephole. No one was there. The porch appeared empty. I waited and looked again, thinking someone might be standing slightly to one side. I still saw nothing. I should have gone back upstairs and called it a night. Instead, I unlocked the door. I pulled it open quickly, holding the knife ready in case someone rushed toward me. The porch was empty. There was no one in the yard. I stepped outside, which was exactly the kind of bad decision people make in horror movies before something terrible happens. I looked toward the street, the sides of the house, and the front gate. Nothing moved. No car was driving away. No person was hiding near the fence. The neighborhood was quiet. I checked the surface of the door, expecting to see marks from whoever had been hitting it. There were no dirty handprints, scratches, or smudges. There was no sign that anyone had touched it. I stayed outside only for a few moments before the reality of my situation reached me. I was standing alone on a porch after midnight with a small knife, searching for someone who might be hiding nearby. I quickly went back inside and locked the door. As I returned upstairs, I turned off the lights one by one behind me. By the time I reached my room, my hands were sweating. I locked the bedroom door, climbed into bed, and kept the knife nearby. I did not hear the banging again, but I remained awake for at least another hour or two. Every normal sound in the house seemed suspicious. Eventually, I convinced myself that it had been the wind or some part of the building settling. I was tired, stressed, and staying alone in a new place. Perhaps the noise had sounded more dramatic because I was already nervous. A few days passed. Nothing else happened, and I started to relax. Then, late one night, I was lying in bed and close to falling asleep when I heard the front gate slam. This was not a small noise. The gate was attached to the same outside wall as my bedroom, only one floor below. When it struck the wall or its frame, I could feel the impact through the structure of the house. The first slam shook me awake. Then it happened again. The gate was being thrown back and forth with incredible force. I moved to the window and looked down. Because of the angle, I could not see the area directly in front of the gate. Part of the lower yard was hidden by the wall, but I could see the gate itself. It was swinging so far that its edge kept appearing from behind the wall before disappearing again. The metal was bending at the hinges. Someone had to be standing inside the front yard, pulling it toward the house, and then slamming it shut. That was the only explanation that made sense. The force was too strong to be caused by a light wind. Even a heavy gust would not have produced such a steady, repeated motion. I became angry as well as frightened. I thought someone had entered the yard and was deliberately trying to scare me. For some reason, I suddenly imagined myself as some kind of action hero. Instead of calling the police or staying safely upstairs, I grabbed the knife and ran out of my room. I turned on the hallway lights as I went downstairs. The gate continued slamming. The impacts traveled through the front wall. I reached the front door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. The slamming stopped. There was no one in the yard. I ran toward the gate, still holding the knife. I looked toward the street and both sides of the property. No one was running away. There were no people near the neighboring houses. I searched the grass for footprints, but I could not see any fresh marks. The gate was still shaking slightly. That meant I had not imagined a movement. Something had made it swing hard enough that the metal continued vibrating after I reached it. I suddenly became nervous again. I was outside, exposed, with no idea where the person responsible had gone. Something about the gate itself continued bothering me. I looked at it closely and reached for the handle. I tried to pull it toward the house. It would not move in that direction. The gate only opened outward, away from the property. Its hinges and stops were designed to prevent it from swinging inward. I tried again. There was no way to pull it toward the front wall. That realization made my stomach drop. From my bedroom, I had clearly seen it appearing from behind the wall as though it were swinging inward into the yard. It had moved far enough that the hinges seemed to bend. But physically, it was not supposed to open that way. I stood there holding the gate, trying to understand what I had watched. Maybe the angle from upstairs had confused me. Perhaps it had been swinging outward, and I had only believed it was coming inward. But I had felt the impacts through the house. The gate had struck something hard enough to shake the wall. If it only opened outward, what had it been hitting? Then I remembered that I was still standing outside. If someone was hiding nearby, I had placed myself in the perfect position to be attacked. I released the gate and ran back into the house. This time I left all the lights on. I locked the front door, hurried upstairs, entered my bedroom, and locked that door too. I stayed awake for around 4 hours. Every few minutes I looked toward the window, expecting to see the gate move again. It remained still. I could not stop thinking about the direction it had been swinging. There was probably a normal explanation, but I could not find one that night. Soon after that, 2 other people moved into the house. Having roommates changed the atmosphere completely. The building no longer felt empty. There were voices in the hall, footsteps on the stairs, doors opening and closing, and lights turning on in other rooms. Knowing other people were nearby helped me feel safer. Nothing unusual happened for several months. There was no more pounding on the front door. The gate did not slam by itself. I began to believe that the first incidents had been caused by weather, stress, or my lack of familiarity with the house. Then one night, one of my roommates and I went out for dinner. We returned at around 8 in the evening. It was already dark, but it was not especially late. People were still awake in the surrounding neighborhood, and I did not expect anything strange to happen. My roommate was behind me as I walked onto the porch. I unlocked the front door and entered first. The layout of the house made it possible to see straight down a hallway from the entrance. At the end of that hallway was the dining room, and beyond it was a large sliding glass door leading into the backyard. The back of the house was dark. Only a small amount of light from the front patio traveled through the hallway. It was not enough to clearly see everything, but it created a faint outline of the dining room and the glass door. The moment I stepped inside, I saw someone standing outside the sliding door. It was a dark, human silhouette. The figure appeared to be facing the house. I could not see its face or clothing, but I was certain someone was there. I immediately told my roommate to stay on the front porch. My first thought was that someone had entered the backyard and might be trying to break into the house. I looked for something larger than my small knife. The nearest object I could grab was an umbrella. It was not a great weapon, but it was better than running toward a possible intruder with nothing. I took the umbrella and ran down the hallway. As I approached the dining room, the backyard patio light switched on. It had a motion sensor. The sudden light filled the area beyond the sliding door. No one was there. The silhouette had disappeared. I did not stop. I reached the sliding door, pulled it open, and ran into the yard. Once again, I was making the exact decision every sensible person tells you never to make. The backyard was empty. I searched near the door, along the fence, and behind anything large enough to hide a person. I found nothing. I checked the ground for footprints. There were no clear marks. I examined the sliding door. The only visible prints on the glass appeared to be mine. There were no dirty handprints on the outside and no sign that someone had been trying to open it. I walked to both sides of the house. The property had tall metal fencing, around 8 feet high. Climbing over it would have been difficult, especially without making noise. One side of the house had a larger gate wide enough for a car, but it was locked. The other side had no easy entrance. For someone to disappear from the backyard, they would have needed to climb the high fence, unlock a gate from the inside, or somehow pass me while I ran down the hallway. I had seen no movement. My roommate eventually entered the backyard and asked what had happened. I explained that I had seen someone standing outside the sliding door. Then I told her about the pounding on my first night and the gate that seemed to swing in the wrong direction. Her expression changed immediately. Until that moment, I had not told her much about the earlier incidents. I did not want to scare the new tenants or sound like I was making up ghost stories. Now that I had seen the figure, I told her everything. She became frightened and wanted to go back inside. We searched the house and checked the doors and windows. Nothing appeared damaged. No one was hiding inside. There was no evidence that an intruder had entered the property. I tried to explain the silhouette as a reflection. Sliding glass doors can easily reflect shapes from inside a house, especially when the outside is dark. Maybe I had seen my own shadow or my roommate standing behind me. But the shape had appeared outside, close to the glass. It also seemed too far down the hallway to be my reflection. The patio light activated as I approached, but by then the figure was gone. Maybe the light made the reflection disappear. That is possible. Out of all the events in the house, the silhouette may have the easiest normal explanation, but combined with the pounding and the gate, it felt like part of the same pattern. Something happened when I was alone, or the first person entering a space. The front door was struck when no one else had moved in. The gate slammed while I was upstairs by myself. The silhouette appeared when I was the first person through the entrance. Each time I rushed toward the disturbance. Each time there was nothing waiting for me. It almost felt as though something wanted to draw me outside or deeper into the house. That thought disturbed me more than the noises themselves. What if the pounding had been meant to make me open the front door? What if the gate had been moved so I would run into the yard? What if the silhouette had been placed at the sliding door to pull me toward the backyard? Every time I had followed, I had stepped outside with only a small blade or an umbrella, assuming I would find a person. I never found anyone. After the incident with the silhouette, I became much more careful. When I heard noises at night, I did not immediately run outside. I checked through windows and listened first. I kept the doors locked and made sure the other roommates knew when I was coming and going. Nothing else major happened before I left. A few months later, I got a different job and moved away. I asked the roommates who remained in the house whether they had experienced anything strange. They said they had not. No pounding, no moving gate, no figures near the sliding door. That was good, but it also made the events harder for me to understand. If the house itself was haunted, why did nothing happen to anyone else? Maybe the noises had normal causes that I misunderstood because I was alone and stressed. Maybe the silhouette was only a reflection. Maybe the gate had been moving outward, and the upstairs angle made it look as though it were bending inward. Those explanations are possible. I had been under pressure when I moved in. I had nearly become homeless, was paying more rent than I could comfortably afford, and was sleeping alone in an unfamiliar house. Stress can affect the way people interpret sounds and shadows. Still, I know the banging was real. I heard it clearly enough to count the pattern. I know the gate was moving because I watched it and felt the wall shake. I know it was still vibrating when I reached it. And I know I saw a human shape standing outside the sliding glass door. Years later, I drove past the house again. It looked normal. A single family appeared to be living there now. There were signs that people had settled into the property and made it their home. I wondered whether they had ever heard pounding after midnight. I wondered whether the front gate had ever moved against its hinges. I wondered whether anyone had walked through the entrance at night and seen a person standing silently near the back door. Part of me wanted to stop and ask. I did not. Imagine a stranger arriving at your house and telling you that years earlier, something used to bang on the doors and move around the property when no one was visible. There would be no good way to have that conversation. So I kept driving. I still do not know what happened in that house. Perhaps someone had been targeting the property and disappeared before I reached the door each time. Maybe the wind and strange angles created the rest. Maybe I was more frightened than I realized and connected unrelated events into one story. But one detail continues to bother me. The gate only opened outward. I tested it myself, yet from my upstairs window, I watched it bend and swing toward the house with enough force to shake the wall beneath my room. I have never found a logical way to explain that. Whatever was happening seemed to stop once more people moved in, and it did not trouble the tenants who stayed after I left. Maybe it had nothing to do with the house. Maybe it was interested only in the person who arrived first. And for those first few nights, before anyone else came to live there, that person was me.
The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.